You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at M.A.Y.A.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 45 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, the podcast that I like to embrace and say that it looks at salient topics from a fresh and forward-thinking perspective. I see myself that way because we're talking about mental wellness. And the one thing I want to get people acclimated with is mental wellness does not mean mental illness. It's kind of a focus, a mid-ground between mental health. Like you have physical health, you've got mental health, and mental wellness is kind of this all-encompassing thing. So I want to get people comfortable with the idea of mental wellness and how it definitely permeates through every aspect of your life. With that being said, the focus of this podcast is to pull back that veil of self-doubt and sabotage that so many of us are plagued with, and to help you to identify the ambitions and harness the motivation to help you to yield the satisfaction and success that you seek in your daily life. Remember, part of what we're focusing on with M.A.Y.A in this particular year of 2021 is we're looking at things incrementally. We're looking at the best version of you every day, harnessing happiness every day. With that being said, if you are a first-time listener or viewer, welcome aboard. Buckle up for safety. I'd like to say occasionally it can get a bit unexpectedly bumpy because I may say something that may jar a memory for you, elicit a certain emotion that you weren't prepared to have. And that's all what M.A.Y.A is about, to get you into that thinking about things that maybe you've tucked away that you need to pull out and reconcile so you can get to that best version of yourself. And of course, if you are a returning listener or viewer, well, welcome back. You're more than familiar with how things go down here. Of course, as I say, grab a spot that's quiet. If you can do that, grab your beverage of choice. I'm double fisting today. I'm doing some coffee along with some water. I'm trying to hydrate and hit my water goal. So far, 2 days in a row, I've gotten like 96 ounces in. That's work for me, but I've managed to achieve it. So whatever you're drinking, it's 5 o'clock someplace because I've got people who watch in Canada and Morocco and Egypt and Dubai and all around the world. So somewhere, if you're having a glass of wine or whatever the case may be, or a beer, so be it, join in. I say grab a pencil and paper because sometimes I may say something that's worth you reflecting on a little bit later. And you may want to think back so you can jot down some ideas. Of course, the next 60 minutes, as I always say, something that people tend to struggle with, it's about you and me. So get comfortable. Like I said, find that place if you can so you can focus and really get into what this episode is all about. So welcome to episode 45 of M.A.Y.A. As you know by now, if you want to join the conversation, all you have to do is type your comment into either YouTube or Facebook in the comment section, and I can stream it on screen with everybody. I'll make sure I read it just in case if people are just a listener, they'll be able to know what you put. So if it's something brilliant or you just want to share and interact, it's important. That's how you can get involved with the show. Hopefully by now you can listen to episodes of M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A.com. Remember, there's always a podcast companion with every podcast. I add some additional information I think it could expand the conversation for you and kind of give it more depth. So you just go to M.A.Y.A.com, you click on podcast resources, go to episode 45, and there's some additional things you can check into. I would say we say this every week, but I'll never stop saying it. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, M.A.Y.A. Just type that in and voila, like I say, a whole bunch of Japanese anime is going to pop up. Scroll down and you'll see me. Click like, share, and subscribe. And I'm not a picky person because if you're listening, I appreciate that you're present in the moment with me. You can always find episodes of M.A.Y.A on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify, all those podcast platforms. So if it's a platform, more likely not, I'm on it. So just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and you will find me there. So there's always, if you can't tune in when the show airs on Thursdays at 2 p.m., never fear, you can always grab it on M.A.Y.A.com or any of those podcast platforms. And lastly, as we're wrapping up our housekeeping items, make sure you get social with me. You follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Maya_Akai and Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. And if you remember from last week, I'm doing something that I kind of get to weave into this show, but it's not driving the conversation, but it sort of is. I have a new segment, which is called Maya's Mailbag. So a lot of times people have reached out to me after episodes and say, this particular episode really got me thinking about something, and I have a couple questions. I always encourage people to do that. You can just go to MA.A.com. So now I've pretty much said, hey, send me a virtual letter. Go to MA.A.com, go ahead and send me an email via that way, and then I can kind of respond to more direct questions you might have had about a very specific episode or this podcast, or you just may pose a question. So how you can do that, if you don't want to go to MA.A.com, just go to Get Inspired at MA.A.com, and you can send me a virtual letter about this episode, a question or feedback, or some other episode that you're listening to. So just go to MA.A.com, comment on the episode, and or Get Inspired at MA.A.com is how you can also send me a direct letter. And like I've said before, if your letter is just so compelling, I might have to go ahead and do an episode with it, just because that's how last week was. It was a really good question, and I felt it was episode worthy. So that's how you can get involved in the show. Welcome to the show, Charles Edward Bingham McDavid Sr. Good afternoon. It's been a while since I've seen you. Glad to have you back aboard. You always give good input. Just like Charles, you can put something in the comment section, and I can share it on screen just like this and read it and share your comments. So that's how, again, you get involved in the show. Okay. Let's go right ahead and jump into episode 45. I love getting through my episodes, but of course, before we jump into that, open up your toolbox, because we're going to be putting some things into the toolbox today. And we always take out our EI, even though by now your EI should be front and center with every single episode and every moment of your life. And if you're new to the show, remember EI, to refresh it, it refers to your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate not just your emotions, but the emotions of others as well. So it should always be on the table with this conversation. But if you're really using your toolbox correctly, all the things we're putting in it when you watch Maya, then your EI would be the number one thing you wake up with and put it on the table, and you only put it away when you go to bed at night. So something else that I've tied into the episodes that I think are really important is a saying that I'm going to use to kind of spread throughout the entire year. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, says Aristotle, as you know, a Greek philosopher. And to me, this really embodies what almost every episode is about. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, because it opens your eyes and it opens the windows to the world and opportunities that when you really touch base with you and understand you, so many other things tend to fall into place. And that's really what we focus on in this podcast. So, episode 45, building the brand that is you. And it was interesting because I was kicking around, what am I going to talk about this particular episode? You know, usually they kind of tie together, and this one kind of came out of being on its own, which I'm okay with. You know, I feel this episode is more of a life coach episode with major mental wellness implications. And I say that because we truly think of ourselves, we don't really think of ourselves as long-term projects that need upgrades and renovations. And you should. Just like you invest time and energy into houses and cars and things of that nature, you should invest that same energy into you. We are long-term projects that require upgrades and renovations that help us to continue to grow and to maximize opportunities. So I feel like this episode about branding is a great way to kick off that conversation. So, you know me, I'm all about being literal about things. What is a brand? Interesting enough, we usually think of a brand as a product, which is a process of branding, which would be the verb for it, where we focus our resources and our energies towards creating a strong and positive perception of usually like a company, a product, or a service. So in essence, there are three types of brands. Now, mind you, you can Google this and you can probably find about 6 more, because all conversations and school of thoughts tend to expand on things. But in essence, there's roughly 3 brands that you can kind of say are the platforms that you would build from. Most people are familiar with corporate brands. So you know brands like McDonald's and Apple and things of that nature. Then you have products and services. We have Apple, but then you have the iPhone, which is a product which gives you a service of a cell phone. So that's the kind of stuff people tend to think about when they think about branding. They rarely ever think about the portion of branding that is personal, because we're more familiar with the first 2. And a lot of times when it comes to our personal brand, we tend to leave that to chance. And I want you to rethink that, because the power of your brand, you have no idea how it can literally change your life a lot more quicker than you realize, because you're being really succinct in who you are, what you do, how you do it, and how you put it out there. So let's move past the idea of corporations and products and services, and let's make it personal. because that's what episode 45 is all about. So if we're going to put, the conversation of a personal brand into a framework, okay, I would tell you that a personal brand is how a person perceives you in various contexts: social, professional, and private. I would say those are the key domains that where your brand are extremely important, and they do tend to overlap. Let me say that. So let me ask you this question when we think about brands. When you think about your brand, if you've ever thought of it that way, is the perception of you deliberate in the creation of who you are, or accidental or situational? And you may say, well, Maya, I don't get it. What's the difference? Because a lot of us kind of go through our lives, like I said, without thinking of ourselves of having a personal brand. So we fall into things kind of accidentally, or a situation kind of helps us to shape who we are. Don't get me wrong, we're going to get into how past experiences do play into this, because that is part of the conversation. Or are you a person who acts with purpose and intention, which would make it then deliberate? And that definitely makes it different. Now, when I ask about the deliberate piece, I want you to think about how you live your life, leading daily interactions with people based on your core values, morals, or specific belief systems. And it's interesting because if you watch the show by now, you should know I constantly talk about core values and morals and all those things, because they're important, because they become the foundation of who you are. For better, for worse, for good, for bad, it's a part of it, and you can't work your way around it. So are you thought of by people? Now just think about how people may perceive you, because a brand is a perception of what you have projected of yourself. Like I said, either deliberately or maybe accidentally or by a situation. So here's what I would ask you. What do people have a perception of you of? For instance, you may hear people say things like, oh, this person is really religious. That person's a Bible thumper. You may hear someone say, oh, that person is really in tuned and very spiritual. You may hear someone say, oh, he's a bad boy, or oh, she's a good girl. That's all branding. The question I would put with that conversation about branding is, were those associations of who you are deliberately put out there? Some people work the bad boy image. Some girls work the good girl image. Some people lead with their spirituality or their religious beliefs. So hence they lead with it intentionally. It's deliberate. So that means that is what they're crafting of their personal brand. So I always ask people that to really consider in what you do when you project yourself to people in those key domains of professional, social, or private. Is it deliberate? Or is it more accidental or situational, and you just kind of fell into something and you kind of go with it because you never really thought, I have a personal brand that I really need to make sure that I'm the architect of because of how much it's going to impact my life. Because people don't think about how much your personal brand impacts your life. We speak vaguely of of branding, like in purpose and intention and things of that nature. That all fits into the conversation about branding. Okay. So let's have some real talk time. The first one of the show. And I kind of just asked it when I said, let's make it personal about what is branding. I would ask you the question, and I already did, so I'm going to bring it back up again. Have you truly been mindful, aware, and intentional in how you present yourself to the world? And that's big because the world is a very big place. And we have a lot of interactions and cross interactions that influence us and that we try to navigate. We are navigating our way through the world. And the question is, are you firm? Are you secure enough in your brand to know that as you move forth into the world, you feel you're not being misunderstood or misinterpreted because you lead with intention and purpose? You're very, very succinct about what you want people to think of you. Now, of course, we can dive into that conversation about people who don't care about what people think. That's another conversation. But let me throw this in there when we talk about real talk. And this is where it gets to kind of be interesting. Have you acted in ways that you feel who you truly are and reflects what you believe in? So it's very important because this can be a very slippery slope, because often with social norms, or we may call dominant culture, it tends to dictate what is deemed appropriate and acceptable. We call them social mores when we get into psychology. The things that this is acceptable behavior, this has gone too far, and there's this gray area that you can work in, but be careful not to cross that line because now you're not acting in a socially acceptable way. Oh, I already know where this conversation could go with people. Don't worry, I'm going to go there with you. Good afternoon, Roburn from Hawaii, checking in. Aloha. Good to have you on board as well. But it's important for you to really, truly understand when we talk about the idea of personal branding, that of course social norms are really important. Imagine trying to navigate everything from a perspective of political correctness as part of your brand. And this is why I say knowing your brand is important, because we are now challenged with a lot more things that you have to consider as you are maintaining and managing your brand. I'm not saying you're shifting your brand because of it, but you have to be mindful there are demands that can be put on your brand that you have to acknowledge. So let's just say for decades, we've been in that conversation about political correctness. So as you know, that's more of a term that describes like the language, policies, and measures that are intended to avoid offending individuals in society, especially if they're looked at to be in disadvantaged or disenfranchised groups. So we know that political correctness, we've led with that conversation for quite a bit of time. And it's interesting because now political correctness has kind of grown up and has gotten bigger, better, and badder. And now we talk about cancel culture or call out culture, which is a form of kind of ostracism in a way, which someone is thrust out of, maybe social or professional circles, whether it be actual physically, social media, or whatever the case may be, because they have acted or spoken in a questionable way or it's controversial. So political correctness has now become way more action oriented, and it's now cancel culture as it's gotten bigger and badder. And I guess we can say more woke as a culture, but I would tell you that's an interesting thing, because one of the things that I personally feel about things like political correctness and cancel culture is I think they are a detriment to good conversation and exchanges that need to happen to grow. So I feel like when someone is walking on eggshells because they don't feel that they can truly express what they're thinking. And when you express what you think, by the way, it doesn't mean that you have to be rude or insulting. Go back to the episode about the art of communication. It's worth a listen. You can learn how to express what you think without being offensive to someone. One of the things that I personally do in conversations when I know I'm about to say something that is not exactly going to be like a popular opinion, or it's probably going to rock the boat, is I will preface it with people and say, I need to say something that I know that you're probably not going to agree with, and I'm okay with that, but it's what I think or what I feel, whatever the case may be. And I think it's important to mention this, because to leave it out the conversation, to me, I don't feel like that I'm properly representing myself or sharing what I think and feel. So just know that when I say this, I'm not saying this is how it is. I'm saying this is my perception of it, and perhaps we can talk about it from there. That's how I address things with people when I know they're instantly either going to get defensive. This is where your EI comes in. When you know who you're talking to, I'm not saying you may be 100% correct in how they're going to react to you, but people that we truly know, we tend to know their personality types. So when I know I have to say something that's going to rock the boat or make someone uncomfortable, I go ahead and set the table and let them know we're about to have some conversation that's probably not going to be something that you want to talk about or pleasant, but it doesn't mean it doesn't need to be had. The key thing about things like political correctness and cancel culture is that, especially within professional spaces like where you work, these two things are paramount to understand, because in each domain you function in, professional, private, and social, there are different expectations of interaction. So with professional domains specifically, you need to be careful how you navigate it. I'm gonna give you a kind of a story of someone who kind of popped in my mind when I put this episode together. I was working with a client who was in a situation at work where one of her coworkers said a really derogatory racial stereotype thing. And it happened to be the person who was my client, another coworker, and the coworker who made the statement. Unfortunately, the person who was offended, who happened to be a person of color, it was actually a comment made about Black people that was really stereotypical and derogative, was actually going to let it just kind of go under the radar and not say anything, because she didn't want to rock the boat. She didn't want to cause any issues or problems. The difference was the person that was with her disagreed, who happened to be white, and said, "Oh, no, 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 no. That's not okay." And then proceeded to go to people and report the information. Even though the person who felt offended was willing to let it go, she felt uncomfortable, but she realized that it was probably the right thing to do, but she didn't feel within the stage of her career that it was appropriate, that she had a voice to express herself. The long story short, she tells me, is that the person who made this statement actually ended up getting terminated. Now, she also said that she thinks it was a culmination of different things this person had done that kind of led to it. She goes, she really felt bad, but at the same time, she realized that it was inappropriate and there was no place for that language. And the person actually tried to normalize the derogatory comment by saying, I like Black people. I didn't mean it that way. My kids say that. My husband says that. And the person looked at her like, well, this is even worse because you've taken such a negative connotation and you've normalized it in your family. Interesting enough, when the person was terminated, she said that it was kind of a mixed emotion about it within the workplace. And she was talking to a fellow coworker, and she goes, she really kind of felt offended, but again, she didn't feel she had the voice to speak to the situation because she felt the person making the comment was close to the person who was terminated. But the person said, it was wrong what she said, but did she really deserve to be fired for it? Everybody makes a mistake. Hence comes political correctness and cancel culture. So I would tell you, I share that story because I think it's key for people to understand there isn't a time and a place for everything. It does not mean within the scope of your brand that every element of what you believe in from your morals, values, or belief systems is going to coincide with others. And there are certain circles when you need to understand that, especially when you need to protect your brand. So with that being said, just know you must know your company's culture from what their belief systems and their mission is and what they look for in their employees. But you also must be aware of your fellow employees or peers or managers, whatever the case may be, that you may be able to offend in the way you think about something. So it's important to know the circles you move in. A lot of people feel in their workplaces that they can be very transparent and say what they think because it's that kind of environment. And I've worked in those kind of environments. I work in that kind of environment. But it's interesting because it only takes one person to overhear your conversation at work who's not in your respective circle to go back and to report you to HR and say, I wasn't part of this conversation, but they said that, and I was really offended that they even thought that way. It may not get you terminated, but it may get you a visit in the HR office with your manager about what you said. Like, I know that's your opinion, but we can't accept, nor can we tolerate there. And there could be an action because remember, tolerance, zero tolerance within workplaces has to be pretty much consistent. It's not always consistent, but I would tell you when you're building your brand, be mindful of how your core values, your morals, and your belief systems kind of align with that workplace. Because a lot of people often think, I'll say what I want to say and I'm not going to filter myself because I don't feel like I have to. And that can come with a consequence. There's a workplace etiquette, whether you want to accept it or not. And if that workplace does not have your name on the building, you then are required to subscribe to somebody else's workplace etiquette. And it's important that you know what that is. So when you talk about the social domain, obviously it's a little less restrictive but it's also a very integral part of your brand. Because when you talk about social domains, keep in mind you have those intersocial domains, which are kind of like not maybe as close of relationships, maybe friends. I used to call more like pervasive friends, interactions. There may be people in the group better than others. So how you choose to interact in that group. But there's also within social interactions, there's an etiquette within your social groups. And then you have what I call the within social groups. And those are the people that you can speak your mind when you want, how you want, because one, either you tend to be like-minded individuals or you have a clear understanding and your brand has been established with them. So you are free to be yourself. It's important to know that your brand will coexist at different levels depending on the domain that you actually exist in. And people sometimes struggle with this, but real talk. You can't be Peter Popoff just because you want to be and think there's not a consequence. And I've seen people do it, speak their mind, and all of a sudden they get in trouble and they're like, woe is me. I was like, whoa, no, because given the situation you were in and given the circle you were interacting with, it was inappropriate and you should have known. And just because you believe that you're not going to silence, mute yourself, or you're not going to quiet your voice, then just know it's going to come with a consequence. And if you're okay with the full acceptance of that, then okay. But don't be surprised if you get pushback because who you are within your brand does not align maybe with a particular professional setting, or maybe you don't work in a social setting because you just don't align with them. And it's okay to exit things where you don't fit if it makes sense. So The private domain is definitely that area that I would tell you you get to be a little more you, because this is truly, even in that extension of that interest circle I talked about, this is definitely where people are aligning with you with your values and morals and belief, and you can be more laxed, or can you? I ask that question because often as people, we grow and we change and discover new things as we evolve as people. And this may take us away from what is constant or familiar, and it can affect your relationships, because I'll be honest, I saw in the last, let's say, 5 years, I've seen sides of people that I never knew. I'm serious. And I'm still processing some of it. I'm still not exactly sure what I think, because there's a part of them I see in one way, and then I see a whole nother type of what I hear is values and belief systems. And I'm trying to process what I think I'm seeing. I've given no judgment, but I clearly didn't see that side of them until recently. And it was really politically focused, to be honest. As you know, we became very, very divided as a country under President Trump, for better or for worse. And so it was interesting. If you know about this, when that election came up, you had friends that stopped interacting. You had family members that stopped talking. So think about this. So even though you may feel within the scope of your private domain that this is a safe space, people grow and change, and you may not align anymore with values that you had, that you challenged and you grew past. And I think that's important. Yet within that private domain, this is a domain that we honestly set our table, because your private domain really begins in childhood. And here's one thing I want you to understand about this portion of your personal brand is that your childhood, you are not the architect. Many of your core values and morals and belief systems come from your family, cultural groups, things of that nature. As you grow and change and expand past that, it doesn't mean you stay within line of those things. So it's always important to know that you are the sole architect of your brand now. And there's elements to that design that we're going to talk about to really kind of flesh it out. You know, you have position, you have promise, you have personality. There's a story and associations that all work into your brand building that we will pull apart and dive into a lot more as we go further into episode 45. I want to give you a toolbox moment, because this is going to be our toolbox, our lone toolbox for the day. Today, we need to understand the purpose and the power of critical thinking. This will be one of the most important tools that you will utilize as you are either building your brand, reevaluating your brand, whatever the case may be. Didn't know you had one, so just all of a sudden this is all new. Whatever it is, critical thinking is one of the most important things that we have to put in your toolbox today. If it's not there, maybe we just need to hone up your skills on it and go from there. The key thing about critical thinking is this is obviously another way of saying objectivity, because literally, if we give it a definition, critical thinking is analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment, is ultimately what it means to do critical thinking. It is imperative that we learn to think beyond ourselves, especially if there is a struggle connected to what we're thinking about and it's somebody else's experience. And we can see currently how critical thinking has literally gone out the window for a lot of people. So when you're using critical thinking, the way you can make sure that you have your critical thinking hat on is ask yourself a couple questions when you're engaged in a situation or a conversation that isn't aligning itself necessarily with your brand. So maybe it doesn't fit in with your core values or your belief systems or your morals. Ask yourself a couple questions to kind of begin the critical thinking wheels to turning. Ask yourself, what does it not mean to you? Like, how are you not connecting with it? So let's be honest. If we use an example of, let's say, we could talk about, I want to give you an example of how things cannot be what you think they are. But it's the kind of thing is, if we use the current political climate, because it's still kind of cascading into 2021 with a new president in place, a lot of people are still very divided, can't see eye to eye. And I've heard some of the most interesting things I've ever heard in my entire life. And sometimes I say, this can't possibly be real. But I stop and I say, well, what they're saying doesn't mean anything to me. So perhaps I need to be a bit more open-minded about what they're saying. Now, what I'm not saying is when you embrace other people's conversation or listen to what they're talking about, I'm absolutely not saying to you to abandon what you believe in to accommodate someone else. That's not what that's saying. And I want you to be very clear about that, because what might be truth for someone else doesn't mean that it's truth for you. And it doesn't mean somebody else's perspective, belief systems, values, or morals doesn't have credence. You should never discount somebody else's belief system because it doesn't align with you. But we've gotten to a point in society where we've everybody feels everybody else's morals, values, desires, wants, and needs. I have to be front and center, which is interesting because we live in a society where there's more than enough space to accommodate everybody. But the idea of right now is my time is now. I want to be noticed. I want to be heard. And I want to push aside everything else because it's not what I want. So if you actually don't care, you tend to not keep things in front of you, whether things are good or bad. So I think it's really, really important to understand that when you refuse to consider somebody else's point of view just because you don't want to listen, you're not doing critical thinking, because within everyone's interesting argument, there tends to be credence, as I said earlier. I'm going to give you an example before we go to break. I would talk about racism, but that's way too complicated, and that whole thing about critical race theory, which, by the way, some people don't even know what critical race theory is. It's an academic movement that came from people that would kind of coin themselves as civil rights scholars and activists, and they sought to critically examine the law as it intersects with issues of race and to kind of challenge kind of mainstream liberal approaches to racial justice. Ultimately, it looked at racism as a systematic and institutional, way that's affected the country. A collection of prejudices. I'm giving you kind of my take on what it is. So many people misunderstand critical race theory that they hate it. And I do often think the way that it's currently being purported isn't doing it any justice, because the history supports it, but how you present it, how it's now being sold, is instantly going to shut people out because it's marginalizing. But I'm going to use a simpler example: women's rights. So when you think about women's rights, we go back to equal rights for women, where within our country, women didn't have the right to vote. They were pretty much pigeonholed to being in the home. And if a woman was beyond that, if she was educated or scholarly or didn't subscribe to being married with children, she was looked at differently. Not necessarily, she wasn't celebrated, maybe respected, but didn't even when a woman was scholarly at that time, she still wasn't given equal respect as her male counterparts did. Fast forward to 2021. We are still having the conversation about women's rights, because now we have the Me Too movement, which shows there's still an exploitation of women on a different level. But we still talk about fair wages, that a woman could be equally as qualified, educated, and competent as her male counterpart and still not get the same wage. Now, ask yourself this question: how can we still be where we are, considering we know better, that it's wrong? So just know we must always keep in front of us what things are, whether they're good or they're bad. And especially if it makes you uncomfortable, then ask yourself why. And we have to be honest, because it's not women. And I'm not trying to point the finger, but this is when it's important to put things in perspective. It's not women pigeonholing and holding the wages from each other. It tends to be our male counterparts, which means we still haven't resolved the issue that exists. So ask yourself what things were the beginning of the struggle, what they currently are, and what they should be. That's how you can gauge when you talk about things that need to be fixed. We're not having conversations that are salient, so hence people are struggling with it. These are all things that really can be different when you're trying to reconcile your brand, especially in professional and social settings. That where do you stand on things like political correctness? Because to be honest, that's very much a part of your brand, depending upon what you do. How do you feel about cancel culture when something comes up that is controversial, or is it right? Do you say, yes, we should just get rid of it? Or do you say, no, I believe there should be a dialogue of why it's an issue before we decide just to throw it away, assuming that if we block it or throw it away, that the issue goes away? It doesn't. But these are all things when you're building your brand that you have to be mindful of, especially in the current climate in society and even professionally, that can be challenging, that may not align with your core values or your morals or your belief systems. And the question is, how do you craft your brand to make sure that you can stay true to yourself without compromising you if you happen to be on what is considered to be the wrong side of whatever the issue might be? There's a lot that goes into these things, but either way, when you know your brand and you're living your brand, you can proceed differently. Everybody, you are tuned into episode 45 of M.A.Y.A, Building the brand that is you. And we're going to talk more in those nuances about those 5 elements after the break that I talk about that really make a difference. So in the toolbox, I said before we went to break, I need people to understand what critical thinking is and to start to use it, which means thinking outside of what you think is right and seeing all 3 sides of the coin. We'll jump into that a bit more when we come back to break. You're tuned into M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Quick break, everyone, and we will be right back.
I can't breathe. I have migraines, numbness, weight loss. I live with it every day. The illness that I'm suffering from is an anxiety disorder, and it deserves to be treated like any other illness. But it's not.
Please stop and listen because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183. 773-580-7183.
When we come together, we bring the magic. When we stand together, we cannot be moved. We move and move. When we work together, we are a force. When we show up together, we show out. And when we band together, we are unstoppable. Join Cricket Nation in celebrating Black Music Month by supporting HBCU music programs.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.
All right, everybody, welcome to episode 45 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. And this is building the brand that is you. And this, if you didn't know, June is Black Music Month. So Cricket is doing a pretty much awareness piece about HBCUs and bands, which if you know anything about that is an amazing experience. And music is so integral. And hopefully we can see them put back, not just at HBCUs, but back in schools, which lost so much programming and music. And I know that gym classes were removed from a lot of schools to kind of cut costs. So June is Black Music Month, and Cricket Mobile is actually focusing on driving, awareness and dollars towards HBCUs to supplement their programs for music. So if you happen to be a music person, share and go support. Okay, so before the break, I talked about your brand can be challenged. You have your core values, you have your values, you have your belief systems, but that doesn't mean that it makes it easy to navigate the world. And I talked about things like how political correctness can put a chokehold on things, and it can be good, but also can really stifle much needed conversation. We talked about cancel culture and even things like critical race theory, how these are current things that can pop up in conversations in the workplace or your social settings, even your private domains. Either way, when you know what your brand is, you already have a stance on this. The key thing is how you choose to communicate what your stance is, and or is it worthy of communicating it at all? Mindfulness is key when you talk about building and managing your brand. So I said there are 5 elements of your brand. And I mentioned them before. It's a position you have in your brand. It's the promise you have with your brand. There's a story to it. There's accommodation. There's personality. There's all these elements that kind of flesh out what makes your brand. So let's start with your position. And these mirror the idea, the same kind of concepts. If we were talking about branding a corporation or a product or services, it's a very similar conversation. We're just personalizing so you understand how it works to building the brand of you from a personal standpoint. So your position is what makes you, you. What people often fail to learn, and it takes time, I get it, is what makes you unique, different from others who may be like you. We often share things in common with people. We love commonality. Oh, we like sports. You love cats. I love cats, whatever the case may be. But we often can find the commonality, but we often don't find what makes us unique and different. And those are often the things that make us stand apart from people, so to speak. It may be you turned out you're a phenomenal musician, or you may be an eloquent speaker. It's just different things that make people unique. It's important when you are crafting your brand and managing it, you have to know what sets you apart, especially when you talk about in professional and social circles where you may be looking to advance or to have access to new, different, or better things. It's important to know what makes you someone that someone should notice or pay attention to. I know that sounds like, oh my God, that sounds like so cliquey, but it's true. We live in a world where difference is something that people look for to be advantageous. And just think about the fact that there are social clubs like golf, there are, golf clubs, certain criteria to be admitted, all kinds of stuff. There's criteria that either can include you or it could exclude you. More importantly, when you think about your position, what makes you unique in a company's eyes, when companies seek to find employees, they're looking for a certain type of employee. But when you really start talking about management or leadership, they often have very specific things they're looking for in a person to put in that position. This is where, when you know what you are unique and how you're different, you can make sure you put your best foot forward and people know that about you. And it's interesting because one letter I'd gotten once, and this was before Maya's mailbag. Remember, you can always send your questions or comments or something you think would be a good episode for a podcast to getinspired@mayakai.com. She said, I really struggle with being confident. And she goes, I am. But why do I feel like it comes across as being conceited or cocky? And, she's like, I just feel like people see me that way. But she goes, I'm just really confident in who I am. And I said, well, perception is reality. So the people who may be perceiving you as being maybe cocky or conceited may have a little bit more to do with them or you. But I also said, you're just writing me a letter, so I can't know specifically what it is that they think they see. Because sometimes we can convey certain things a certain way that people can totally misinterpret. So just know that yes, companies do look for certain type of employees to hire and to advance. Yes, within certain social circles, people can rise the ladder, and be and get to meet people and be in influential circles based on what people think you bring to the table. Ask yourself a question. Who wants to sit and dine with someone who brings nothing to the table? Only there to eat and to feast, but to have nothing to contribute. Social circles are often, people that are similar and like-minded. It's like they coalesce together. So it's important to know what makes you unique so that your positions and the opportunities that you have access to can align itself. People who often don't know who they are and what makes them unique struggle often to find a place that they feel they can thrive. Note, I didn't say fit in. I said thrive, because they don't quite know who they are and what makes them unique from the group of people that they're aligning themselves with. And these are the kind of things you have to consider. So your position, what makes you you, what makes you unique? 2, your promise. Being congruent in what you believe in and what you do is extremely, extremely important. Congruency is something else we put in the toolbox without beating it up all the time, but congruency is huge. You have to be honest with yourself about what you know to be true about who you are, what you are working on, and who you ultimately aspire to be. Position yourself in circles for who you are right now, not who you are not. I am not a fan of fake it till you make it, because ultimately, this is a lie. I'm sorry, it's a lie, and it's a bad one at that, because you may never be that person, and you'll have to keep masquerading which can be more stressful and can result in long-term mental wellness issues due to the pressure of maintaining something that's unreal and unreasonable in regards to having expectations for yourself. And a lot of people don't get that. So aligning yourself for who you are right now and being in the moment is so important. Happy birthday, Vernon Fairley. Happy birthday to you. Lovely. Maya and her wet hair. No, I was hoping it'd be dry by now, but it's not. So yes, it's still sort of wet. Thank you for, noticing that it's still wet. But anyways, happy birthday to you as well. But it's really key to understand that you must be congruent. It's important to embrace who you are in the moment. What does this brand as you are today speak about you? Who are you? And it's important that what you believe in is what you do. So don't be someone you're not, because it gets back into that trying to fit in doesn't help you to necessarily thrive. It may keep you in a survival mode. And most people don't tend to think about these things, so to speak. So that congruency piece is a toolbox, something I don't really always hit home on. I say it a lot. So if I'm talking about putting critical thinking in your toolbox today, you know what? Throw congruency in there, because it's come up more than enough times for us to know that it's important. A third element of your brand is your personality. Do you walk the walk you talk? And that gets back to, everything that you ultimately say. So here's the thing. If you say you're a punctual person, then be on time. If you say you're an open-minded person, then be a good listener and use your emotional intelligence and objectivity skills to be open-minded. And now put your critical thinking in there as well. If you say you are a leader, then be open, compassionate, fair, and action-oriented. However, you've chosen to package yourself to sell to the world. Be that. Be the best version of that without excuse or fear. And that's what's key. People will always, people often talk about this in relationships, that they meet somebody and people are so busy trying to put up this perfect facade, this front, I'm this, I'm that, only to find out that that person is not that. And they wonder why it becomes a detriment to the longevity or the reality or healthiness of the relationship. There's no point of being who you're not. Very good point, Vernon Fairley. Be a walking resume. So whatever's on your paper should be factual, true, and not embellished, but it should definitely work to what your best assets are. Bottom line. When people go on interviews, you shouldn't even have to look at your resume because you wrote it, and you should know it instantly. You should have a mission statement for yourself, something that was said last week by someone. And I'm like, that's powerful. Have a mission statement for who you are, what you stand for, what your core values are. Start with that, because some people are like, I'm not sure. Well, guess what? If you start with a mission statement, I am a person who believes in integrity. I will not mislead, whatever it is you want to build, but build a mission statement for yourself. It can be very, very powerful. But it's really important that you be congruent in this. So whatever you say that you are, it's imperative that you be that. You want to feel and be seen for that exactly. Now, I'm going to give you a footnote on this. It's not always easy. And you must determine what's appropriate packaging and content for your brand. You ever hear people say things like they aren't the same person at work as they are with their friends and family? And here's the thing about that. There's nothing disingenuous or incongruent about that. You are autonomous. The world you live in is not. And people need to understand that. So if you struggle to find a place or piece in domains, you must explore why that is and make the necessary adjustments. And this is key. I'm going to say that again because I think this is really important. You are autonomous, I mean, you are a unique being in who you are. But the world is not, because the world is full of autonomous beings, which means it's very fluid and changing and never predictable, so to speak. And some autonomous beings have more influence than others. Let's be honest, it's true. But you cannot act within your brand as if you're autonomous in different domains, because it can be a detriment. So when you hear a person say, when I go to work, I really don't make friends. I kind of do my job. I love my job. I just don't feel I want to draw a line. I had another client I worked with who had said to me, I'm really frustrated. I'm having the same problem again at work. This is a new job and I feel like the same stuff is happening. Well, I tend to believe if a pattern of behavior tends to exhibit itself, you have to say new people, new situation, but the common denominator is you. So what is it about you? What are you presenting in your brand that is drawing people to believe that you're a certain kind of person? And we kind of deconstructed some of the situations, and we had very candid conversations about what she was experiencing. And there was a pattern of behavior about her personality, her brand. She came across as being outspoken and direct and a matter of fact, and left no room for others to be able to express themselves. And I said, well, what you just told me in 3 different situations is identical. In your brand, you are presenting yourself as a matter of fact, and it doesn't mean that you don't know something, but you're not leaving space for others to express themselves. You're kind of abrasive, so to speak. She struggled with it for a bit, but came to understand it and began to have a shift. Now, I said to her, I don't know in your current workplace, because people often aren't as forgiving as we would like for them to be. So I don't know if you get to shift back to the discovery of who you are. Not unless there's a person that you can walk up to that you've had a conflict with and say something, if it's appropriate. If not, let sleeping dogs lie. Because sometimes it's not good to kind of rehash something. But and especially if you feel like a person really just doesn't like you, then you let it sit where it is. And all you can do moving forward is make better decisions. But this is why some people won't necessarily make friends at work, or they tend to limit their interactions with people. But be careful, because at the same time, when you pull back, you may be subduing some of your uniqueness that needs to be seen. So it's important that you don't act autonomous so much when you're at work, but you're not afraid to walk the walk and talk the talk. But make the adjustments when necessary. And a lot of people, to be honest, don't know how to do that. So that's 3. There's 2 more of the 5 elements. The next one is your story. Your past cannot be erased, but it does not have to negate your present or your future. And this is one that's huge for me, because I get this in therapy a lot with people. I hate spending long periods of time on the past unless it's really trauma-based and we have to pull about those pieces to really work on it, then it's fair. But at some point, I'm only willing to commit so many sessions or so many experiences with individuals before we need to move past, okay, we've identified what the issues are. Now let's get action oriented. It may take time for you to really be able to reconcile and to be comfortable with it, but we still need to start making steps forward so that that can happen. Your story should embody, and this was interesting because people struggle with this, within your brand, your story should embody tragedy as much as it does triumph. Nothing was ever created without struggle. Some of the most amazing accomplishments and feats that have ever been in life have been done, had more failures before it got to the success. And it's okay to embrace that as part of who you are. And often people see respect when a person can say, I fell on, my arse so many times before I got this right. But then I had that aha or that light bulb moment. And this is when things turned around for me. You shared your tragedy and it showed how you got to triumph. Mistakes are the only thing we can truly call our own. I don't know who came up with that, but it's ultimately true. Nobody else wants your mistakes. How you decide to learn, but more importantly, live with them is entirely up to you. Now, I'll tell you something about shaming and blaming. It does not have a place in your brand. Do not allow others to shame you when you have acknowledged and reconciled your past mistakes or poor decisions. Don't also create a habit of blaming others for what cannot be changed and cannot be undone, whether it was your own decision or not, or under your own volition. It doesn't matter. Often people linger in the past because much of their situation or experience was out of their control, and hence it's easier to not be responsible, i.e., blame others for the road to nowhere, the pain and the grief that people often have and they've experienced, and they often continue to experience it. It's an ongoing process when you continually blame people. What I want you to know, what you're ultimately doing is you are surrendering your control. It's called blaming. And I'm going to tell you, that's a hard pill to swallow, to get people to say, stop surrendering your control to the past. Stop blaming. Yes, it happened. Can we go back in a time machine and change it? Nope. So what we got to do is talk about it, how it affected you, and how we want it to stop affecting you. When you continue to manifest blame, it usually turns into an undesirable life, and your brand is never where it should be. Hence, it stifles and even destroys your chance of building a brand that really can be positive and thriving and growth and happiness for you. And most people don't tend to understand that. You can't erase the past, but you don't have to live in it forever. Because remember, when it's all said and done, you are the architect of your present and your future. The final element of building your brand or reevaluating or maintaining it is keeping into perspective associations. And it's not exactly when I say associations what you might think about it. When I say associations, I'm talking more about let your light shine through. So let the things that you love, respect, or hold to a high regard be known without fearing or being that you might be unaccepted or it's not good enough. Because if it's good enough for you, it's good enough. And people struggle with it's good enough for me, but it's not good enough for somebody else. Well, it's okay because it only needs to be good enough with you. So if red is your color, then wear it. If you think about a lot of celebrities, there's certain things about their brand, which is really a public brand, but they've come to be known for it. For instance, what pops in my head is Christina Aguilera always has on red lipstick. Things like that. I work with my amazing, loan officer guru, Catherine Okoro, always wears red and, red lipstick, and it's her color. And I've come to know it for it. And she's branded herself every way, but that's something that she's embraced. So if you know something, if you love it, respect it, and hold it in high regard, then make sure you're known for it. Hey, if cats are your passion, it's okay to show it. Don't let people shame you because you happen to love cats. If charity is your passion, share it. Whatever it is that helps you to bring to the surface your personality traits, your core values and your morals, the way you live, something that allows you to be authentic, manifest that because that's your power. I really would struggle a little bit, and I've gotten better about it, and I reduce it. When I see people on Facebook, like just for the heck of it, just like looking at the camera and, doing this and music's playing. And I'm like, okay. But then I realized in some of the people I was watching that I know, it's a sense of power for them because it's been a long journey and they feel connected and they feel proud. And I'm like, something, who am I? I can't do it because for me, it seems excessive and it's not my personality type. I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to this. I don't do nearly as much as social media as I'd like to. And even when I think about sharing things, I'm like, is that the right moment? I don't want to be overkill. That's me though, because that's a portion of who I am. I don't believe in overkill. I'm a minimalist. That's part of my belief system. But just because it's my belief system doesn't mean that other people shouldn't smile at the camera and play music and look cute or not. Sorry. Anyways, so allow yourself to be authentic. Manifest your power. Everyone has a certain amount of power that they're given. But the key thing is we often forget we have it or we surrender it too easy. Reclaim your power. By the way, there's a podcast on that. So you should go listen to it. It was good. I'm not just saying it because it was me. I swear I'm not. All right. We're winding down. Final thoughts on episode 45, building the brand that's you. Ultimately, your brand is everything that is you. You should be mindful of what it means, how you express yourself in action words, lack thereof words, truthfully be told. And even the people you associate with, because we know that old saying, birds of a feather flock together. So if someone doesn't align with your core values and belief systems, you might not necessarily want to keep aligning yourself with people who might compromise who you are, because people love to group us together and say, oh, they're all the same. We see it all the time. And then you have to work to kind of differentiate yourself. It bothers me when people say things like, you're really different for a Black person. I'm like, I'm really different for a person. How about that? How crazy does it sound to say that to somebody that you assume that based on the color of someone's skin? Or I love when people say this, man, for a woman, you know a whole lot about sports. And I'm like, and we're still talking about this? That's closed-minded thinking to me, that you are putting a whole lot of people in a silo. And when someone steps outside the norm of what you assume is that social norm, then you want to think you're giving them credit. But to me, underhandedly, it's kind of like an insult. People don't think about that. And if you've done that, be mindful of it. Stop siloing people and saying because it's a woman or it's a person of color or because a person happens to be whatever, that you assume they're going to be a certain way. Make the assumption based on the brand they put in front of you. And that's it. I love it. Burn. I thought you were going to the Wolf of Wall Street, love that movie, and say, sell me this pen. No, I was not. Crossed my mind though, but good. Great movie, by the way. Thank you for sharing. But it's important to know that we often say that we don't care. And this, I'm going to tell you, is a dangerous proposition because newsflash, everyone cares what someone thinks. Maybe not everyone. And if your existence is intertwined with others, because I told you you're not autonomous in this world, unless you live on an island and you're self-sufficient and you're living off the land or something, then if your existence is intertwined with others, you don't have a choice to kind of exclude how you interact with people, and you can't control it all the time. So what I want you to be aware of is that what other people may think of you based on what you've projected, because remember, you are the architect of your present, and your future, could ultimately impact your happiness, your livelihood, and even your success. Those things can depend on how you choose to project yourself to others. Be mindful. Your personal brand is so important, and I need for people to not forget that and to walk away from it because it's key. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning into episode 45. I appreciate it when you listen. As I said, the whole purpose of this podcast is to help you to acquire your ambition and harness that motivation to help you, to get that success and satisfaction you seek in your everyday life. Remember, you can always find episodes of Maya on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify. If it's a podcast platform, you can probably find me there to search Maya. My Ambition, Your Ambition. But I would just say, hey, while you're doing that and subscribing and liking on those podcast platforms, make sure you go and, subscribe and like MA.com. Remember, there will be a podcast companion that's going to kind of expand the conversation with the other domains, but I want you to do critical thinking and see, I can see how this applies to me personally as much as it does professionally or even socially. It's key. So make sure you check out M.A.Y.A, go to podcast resources, click on episode 45, and voila, there's a couple things there that you can check out. And I would also request, if it's not asking too much, that you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I always appreciate that. So subscribe, like, and share with everyone. Maybe this episode didn't do something for you, but I'll tell you something. Maybe if you have a young adult who is about to go to college or is finishing college, this conversation about building your brand when you're starting your life can be paramount. I'm looking forward to, as I'm prefacing something I'm working on, in July, I'm going to be doing some more life coaching series, specifically with individuals that are going to be going to college or finishing college. Because often we get so excited that we've sent our children away, but we have not prepared them to how to make the most of that college experience. And or perhaps maybe you have now finished college and you're kind of like, what's next? Where do I go from here? I want to make sure that young adults are giving the tools that many of us honestly weren't. So I will have a series of college mentoring programs coming up in July. They're going to be a Facebook series that people can log in and, it'll be interactive, limited to the audience. But I want to make sure I share the knowledge I have in this one right here, especially for entering college or exiting college. Building your brand, your personal brand, could be the most important thing that young adults begin to do as they go forth into their life. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I always appreciate you being here with me. I will see you next Thursday at 2 p.m. But remember, like I always say, your future becomes your past and your present is no more. So live every day to the fullest. Be well, stay safe, and be nothing less than amazing. Ciao.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A Akai.com.